Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, meet Sergeant Craig Reynolds and Arezo Zarrabian, a senior crime analyst from the Vancouver Police Department. Together, they take us behind the scenes for a comprehensive discussion of both the criminal justice system and an update reflecting the work of their innovative and data-driven task force, Project Barcode, investigating and fighting violent retail crime on the streets of Vancouver. Well, welcome to the Voice Retail Podcast, both of you. We're coming to our listeners here. You guys are live in Vancouver. I'm here in Toronto. We're here to talk about Vancouver Police's great work in Project Barcode and retail and all that great stuff. Let's start by telling us who you are and what you do for a living. Craig, why don't you go first? We met at the RCC Vancouver Retail West Conference, so I know a little bit about you and your background, but tell the listeners who are you and what do you do for a living?
Yeah, thanks. It was good to meet you at the conference. So my name is Craig Reynolds. I'm a sergeant with the Vancouver Police Department. I currently work in our operational support unit, so we deal with all online reports and the lower priority calls, so the thefts, a lot of the retail crime, shoplifting calls that are coming through. That's the area I'm in right now. I'm also still working as the business liaison for our department. Quickly, I've been with the department for about 17 years. Worked in patrol for 10 years in the downtown core in our southwest district. I worked in our invest division, in our general investigation unit, our major crime, robbery, arson section, and our youth invest unit. In 2022, I moved over to the business liaison, where I've kind of been working with all the businesses, hotels, BIAs in the city of Vancouver. And then, last year I was promoted to sergeant and moved over to our operational support unit, but keeping up with the business liaison, so we still have all those connections.
Well, that's not a kind of a role or a job for anybody on the force or everybody. How did you get into policing? Did you start there? Did you always want to be in law enforcement or somewhere in the criminal justice system, or how did you find yourself in the job you're in?
I was started out as a teacher, so I was working for Boys and Girls Club out in Langley, connected with one of the neighborhood policing officers. We were running a basketball program together and a couple other programs and talking, and then he kind of convinced me to be an auxiliary with the Langley RCMP, so I was doing that, became an elementary school teacher, and I thought that would kind of satisfy my need to be in the criminal justice kind of world. And then a good friend of mine, her husband worked with VPD, and she said, if you're ever going to be a police officer, now's the time. And it was just before the Olympics. So figured, why not try? Never know what's going to happen. So I applied and then got in, and here I am now.
Oh, fantastic. Arezo, you and I have something in common, a little bit. I did an undergrad in criminology. I think you're a criminologist, and you focus on, so you'd bring a background. We'll be talking about the broader criminal justice system, I guess, and tell us about yourself and what you do at the at VPD.
So I'm actually approaching my 18th year here as a civilian professional at the Vancouver Police Department. Initially, not the career path I had chosen. I tell everyone the origin story. I finished my undergrad, was about to waiting to hear back from law schools. I got waitlisted. One of my professors suggested to pump up my resume, maybe get a job at Vancouver Police Department while I was going to wait and reapply for law schools. And then the rest is history. I ended up pursuing post-bachelor courses and getting into the field hands-on and worked my way up in the Vancouver Police Department. So in my career, I've worked as the research assistant to the chief of police. I worked as the analyst for South Vancouver District for a number of years. Then I moved into the major crime section for a number of years, which I think any police officer that's worked in major crime knows it is drinking from a fire hose, the amount of work, because it's all violent and high-profile files come through the major crime section at any police department. So worked there for a number of years, and then
is that like being a doctor or a nurse and having that kind of the fun, if you can put it that way, of like working in the ER for a little while. Like it's intense, you learn a lot. But
Craig and I, so Craig and I both worked in major crime,
Mm-hmm.
and I think both of us are nodding our head right now, agreeing that it is very similar to the type of incoming emergencies you would get in an ER room with a doctor or nurse. So you would get called out at 2:00 in the morning because a file has started and they need the team. And the analyst is very much part and integrated in that team. So it's an amazing experience, but
it's pretty intense. I
mean, as I said, it's very intense, and you have to be super focused and dedicated to that field while you are there. So
it's a lifestyle, right? It's a real lifestyle.
It's a real lifestyle for sure. It's a real lifestyle. Again, Craig and I are nodding, and it's a real lifestyle. So I needed a bit of a change of pace.
Yeah.
So I left major crime, and then when I started as an analyst in Vancouver Police Department, I had actually always wanted to be the analyst for District 1, which is all of downtown Vancouver and downtown core.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate enough to finally get that position. So I have been the analyst for downtown Vancouver for almost 7 years. And that's really where I enjoy being, because when we think of Vancouver, we think of the downtown core, we think of the businesses, we think of the stadiums, the mass transit system. So it definitely is super intense, and a little different intensity than major crime, but every given day I don't know what to expect, which I enjoy because I'm not someone that likes a routine.
Interesting.
Our district has 10 teams of officers. Mm-hmm. So I am responsible for providing offender profiles. It's very political, as you can imagine, for our district. So if a major file hits or something that's public safety concern, we have to deal with the policy issues with the city staff, new housing that gets placed by the city, everything. So it's just not crime. We have to be liaisons with the business community. We have many community groups that we meet in and have public forums with, and I do various presentations across the district to various community outreach groups. So it's a multifaceted type of career that I'm involved in right now.
No kidding. And you've got some community mindedness too, right? You ran for election as well. So you're clearly passionate about all those intersecting parts of the community and the criminal justice system.
Yes,
right?
I was fortunate enough to have I took a leave of absence from my work and attempted to run for city council.
Thank you for running.
And I didn't win, but I came back to a job I love, and I was grateful that the team kept the job for me while I ventured to try to become a city councilor.
What a great experience!
It is very political.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was a great experience. Met a lot of community members, but you know what? It really just reinvigorated in the fact that I am very community driven. I live in the city. I work in the city. I'm raising a child, have a husband who has a business in the city. So he's a business owner. He complains to me a lot about things going on in the city. So
do you know anybody who could help me with this?
It's not just a job for me. Yeah.
Right on. Who do I call about this?
It's not just a job for me. It's very much my lifestyle and my family.
Fantastic. Well, let's take a quick step back just for context for the listeners and give us a broader context. Is Canada a safe country? What do the numbers tell us versus, 24/7 media, social media, which is left, right, center, wrong, right, just trying to get more clicks on views? And how does Vancouver fit into that? What's your overall perception of safety and crime in the country?
Yeah, Michael, you hit on it actually just in your question. Is we are a society driven on clickbait, I think more so than ever. So generally, to answer the question, I do believe Canada is a safe country when you compare it to other countries around the world with population size and major cities. When we look at it and dissect our major city crime rates compared to other major cities, Canada's a safe country. What I would say at pockets and certain crime types and differences that have risen in the last few years. And, when we get the crime event that hits the news in one of our cities or it hits the national news, obviously that one crime event is an event that's unfathomable in regular circumstances, which is why it hits the news and hits the national news.
Right.
But that crime event generally isn't a daily occurrence in our major cities. And that's why it hits the news, because it becomes of interest, public outcry, and it's good because I think most people go on day to day. They don't have the lens of police officers or people that work as first responders, which is great because we don't need everybody with that lens. But then they see that one event on the news and everything erupts. But as someone who has basically studied crime since they were 18, from university into my career and personal life, I look at it as Canada's safe, but we dissect it. We come to the city of Vancouver. So just to give you a little number game here, we have just over 740,000 population in the city of Vancouver. And on a commuter day, when we have big events or our commuter traffic, we could reach over 1 million people coming into the city for the city population.
Yeah, big city.
When we look at our trends over the last 2 years, we did have a spike in incidents in 2021 and 2022. Now, there was various reasons for that. Obviously, post-COVID, less people on the street, less pedestrian traffic, businesses closing and shuttering, creating real voids in our downtown core. Those were all apparent. Nobody can deny that. But we took a huge stance in 2021 and 2022 as a department to go into the public affairs and to make our statements out to the media to say, our random assaults are up. Our violent shoplifting are up. We're doing these projects. We're trying to work with the city. It was post an era where, there was anti-police sentiment out there. We can't ignore that either. So that there was a lot of factors between that era that when you look at the city of Vancouver, we had a sharp increase in certain crime types. But then I like to say in the last year, when we look at our 2024 numbers, our combined violent crime actually decreased 12%. Our combined property crime decreased by 9%. That's a big deal for us because we came from a place 2 years ago where there was that not great sentiment for the police, and we had increase in violence and random assaults on the streets. So we were able to control that with the amount of frontline officers and projects we've had. But along that, even with numbers that great, when I look at specific crime types right now in downtown Vancouver, well, our robberies are up. Well, what's driving our robbery numbers? Violent shoplifters. What's happened with the violent shoplifters? I mean, that's what we're here to discuss today. But so when you dissect little things like that, I have moms that come and ask me, oh my God, I can't believe you're the analyst for downtown Vancouver. It's so unsafe. I don't feel safe walking down the street. I look at them and I say, I get it. I would say, there's certain pockets I wouldn't want to walk down the street with my 5-year-old. Even today, I get it. But generally, it's a safe city and there are one-offs, but it's much better than what it was. And comparatively, we're dealing with crimes right now that are the surge that we've seen is in crimes that we can kind of attack and is not random in nature to the civilian walking on the street. It's more random in the fact that we're dealing with robberies involved in commercial spaces and retail, and that's what we're trying to now control.
Craig, can you help land us that in your practical experience in two ways? One, we talk about violence involved in retail theft, and I think of it as a strategy more than an outcome. In other words, I'm violent, therefore I will be able to do more. But you tell me, and from your practical experience and your team's practical experience on the street, has it gotten worse, better? Is it qualitatively more aggressive, or are you seeing that kind of those spikes reflected and then controlled with more enforcement or more presence on the street? We'll get to talking about Project Barcode in a second, but I just wanted your kind of overall vibe, if you could say.
Yeah, I think for police officers on the street, it's like anything. Crime ebbs and flows. When I first came on the job, bank robberies were the big things, and that's what we were dealing with. And it was. As members, we were like, okay, big bank robberies, that's what we're going to focus on. And I think with, crime on the street, it goes, as we've discussed, there's different pockets depending on where you are and where you work in the city. You might see different types of crimes. So, talking to a member who works in District 1, they're going to say, yeah, there's retail crime is a lot more than a member who's working in a different district with a smaller retail footprint.
Sure.
So, members in our job, we're just kind of, we see what's going on, and we deal with what's kind of in front of us, what we're seeing, and working with our analysts in terms of, okay, what crime is a specific crime going up this week? Is a specific crime going down that we don't have to, be as focused on? So it kind of is that ebb and flow of, what the members deal with and how they feel, in terms of this, how much crime is happening.
I've always thought about, it's funny you say ebb and flow, because I've always thought about crime and criminals as water. They kind of flow to the least path of resistance, or the greatest opportunity, or whatever. And we talked about, COVID era when stores were closed and there's less people around, less things to be noticed. And is that what's happening in what you guys call District 1? Is it there seems to be, I think of it in two ways, by the way. One is the I don't think it's crime of opportunity, but two, there's a lot more platforms and a lot more ways that criminals in general can traffic the goods, right? They can go online, start an identity, and start selling online. They don't have to set up a pickup truck at the back of a beer store. Are both these things happening together?
I would say, as the people who, and I will say this, that, and we'll probably discuss it more, is the people that are coming and doing these crimes, who are coming and stealing from the store, doing the retail crime. They're often people who are, have an addiction or unhoused or mental health, and they're victims in this as well. As this crime has been driven by fences, by people who are going down to the downtown east side and saying, hey, here's a list, go get me this stuff. And they will give pennies on the dollar to them. So, and then it goes online. And these are the platforms where we're seeing, there's many different ways you can sell products online and look legitimate. It's being discussed more. We have our anti-fencing unit there looking at those different ways that they're being sold after with the fences.
Sure.
We've been connecting with our law enforcement partners in the States, and they had the Inform Act that came out, which is trying to address that. Yeah,
a big case in LA, right? I just saw that the woman who was running that Ulta Beauty thing, she had like a highly rated site. I think it was on Amazon. She was rated as a great seller, and then they just nailed her for restitution. But it's a whole different dimension to how you take stuff. It's interesting. You've got steal on demand, and then you've got, well, I'll just go. I got to build up some inventory, and then I go sell it online. Like it's really dynamic. Yeah.
I think it's very common. I mean, Craig and I were talking about this. Is what we're seeing now is offenders actually going into the stores with a list in their hand. That's not what we were used to, let's say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That blatant in front of us.
Yeah. When I think of that, I think of that in, I've heard that, when food is stolen, it's not the kind of thing you can sell online easily, but it's by request for some restaurants that are really just to bring it in the back door. Do you see any of that?
Yeah. We still see that. We see, clothing is a big one, but food is definitely one. Talking to some of our partners, baby food or specific toothpaste that they can ship out of country. I learned certain toothpaste can go for double, triple what it sells in Canada in different countries. So they're looking at that, and then they're going into these stores. They're getting people to go do it, and unfortunately, when this happens, violence comes with it as well, and we can't ignore that there is violence towards the staff members. I think the big thing that we're trying to change and talking about is it's no longer shoplifting. Shoplifting is the 15-year-old who's stealing the candy bar, or shoplifting's the person who's stealing a sandwich to survive. Yeah, we're seeing people coming in and taking $1,000 of merchandise to then sell somewhere else. So it's retail crime, and I think we have to kind of move away from the shoplifting mindset. Yeah.
I know retailers have
organized.
That ORC, the organized
and I know
retail
we are
crime.
Too.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's the difference that we're seeing now is it's organized retail crime. It's not just shoplifting.
Let's talk about Project Barcode. So I heard, I was fascinated to listen to your presentation back in Vancouver. So let's share that with the people now. I think we get a good sense of what drove the creation, kind of spikes and some obvious opportunity to put some some force against an obvious problem. But tell us about how it works, what the objectives are, how it's evolved, and then maybe share some numbers and what you've discovered and wins and losses and ties. Talk about it.
Yeah, well, it really started in about 2021. Our analysts saw, I think it was a 260% increase in retail crime incidents or shoplifting with sharp weapons. So the violence was really starting to increase. When we started talking to businesses about this, the big thing was the underreporting. So we were talking to businesses, and we'll use one big box store, I won't name them, but they had 1,400 incidents in a year.
Wow.
That were reported. But in reality, they had over 4,200 incidents in a year that we didn't. So. And other businesses, they're reporting maybe 10%, 20% of what's happening, and normally it's when someone's in custody or a weapon was used. So, we started seeing this underreporting. We knew we had an idea things were happening, but we couldn't quite put a number to it. So, Barcode started up to try and start addressing this. It started in District 1. It was patrol members who saw the problem and said, hey, let's try and do something to address it, or at least help the businesses or help the store workers with this violence that's coming at them. So they started doing that. They ran a couple, I think Barcode 1 and 2 was primarily in the downtown core. We saw how successful it was. So it expanded citywide. So we have 4 districts in Vancouver. So all 4 districts were included. More members were brought in to help on that. We won't get into numbers and the nitty-gritty of the project. We like to keep some trade secrets here.
Sure.
But we expanded citywide, and then again, it's about evolving. We can't stay stagnant. We have to adapt and see how trends are going, how the crime is happening. So we recognized we needed to bring our anti-fencing unit in. So we started bringing them, including them in projects. They started. As we're dealing with people, we're getting information we can work with, and then going after the fences. Project Barcode 5, we were able to go after three fences. And
the idea there is if you can't monetize what you steal for that category that is organized crime, then they'll move on to something else. And right.
I mean, and we can go after the people going into the stores all day long, but they'll find someone different if we arrest them, put them in jail. If we put them in jail for a year, 2 years, they'll find someone different.
Right.
And we're not going to put them right. So we have to take that next step up and go for the people who are driving this in this type of crime. So that's the fences, that's the resellers. So that's kind of how we evolved. We also started working with our outside partners. So we've coordinated with police agencies across the Lower Mainland. So, one of the things we saw is as we did our Barcode, they would move away from our city and go into other jurisdictions and start stealing from those stores.
You're just moving the problem around. The risk is you're moving it to somebody else's problem, but it's still a problem, right?
Yeah, so we started working with other jurisdictions. They've all been doing different projects as well. So we would coordinate.
Right.
When we would do a project, they could do a project too. So that way, when they pushed out, there would be a project there to deal with it as well. And then, we worked with the Retail Council of Canada. We're on the Retail Crime Task Force. It's really easy to say and comes off quite quickly. And we've been working with our partners and retailers across Canada. They use Barcode kind of almost as a blueprint for other agencies that are coming on to see one that's been successful. And then one of the other things we've evolved, and I think is one of the most important things, is our relationships with the businesses. The community involvement, the community engagement has been huge. Making those contacts with businesses. Yeah. Providing training, safety training to staff who aren't dealing with, the front-end staff who are seeing these crimes.
Day after day. Now, you shared, in Vancouver, you shared some numbers of some of these perpetrators had just incredibly high, because you track this stuff, and Arezo, there's nothing like numbers to work with, and actual numbers versus anecdotes. You had some incredible numbers. I don't know if you can share them now, but how many times people were either arrested or fell within the net of of Barcode. Can you share that kind of order of magnitude?
We can give you some numbers from to date what Barcode has yielded, which is we had over 170 retail participants in our Barcode projects so far. We had 166 repeat offenders arrested, which we can discuss that further because I have a lot of data on that and anecdotes to share. Over 1,400 arrests were made between Barcode 1 and 6. We had 133 weapons seized during our projects. And some of the weapons, I think people need to understand, it's not just a knife or a syringe, which is kind of, not that those aren't weapons, but those have become so day-to-day to some of the retailer and retail staff. That's just the low bar. We were finding weapons, like in one instance, we found a sawed-off shotgun on one of the offenders. We had brass knuckles. We found a machete. So when we say 133 weapons, we found real significant weapons in that 133. It wasn't just a sharp object that, they brandished at a retailer, retail staff. We've had about $500,000 of stolen merchandise recovered from our projects. And because we had surveillance and our anti-fencing investigators in 2 phases of our projects, which yielded even more because we went after civil forfeiture, we actually recovered $1.4 million. If we look at the recovered goods from the shoplifting angle and compare it to the cash seized, cars seized, property seized, drugs seized from the fences, it equates to 1.4 million. So it is a project that obviously we've gotten a lot of national attention. Even the U.S. Authorities are on board and want to know the nitty gritty of our projects because I think we've got into it to such a system that we know what we're looking for and we're very much driven by data. So we got these numbers because initially I noticed an increase in District 1, which is the downtown core. We were talking to businesses. They were telling us it's even more than what we had reported. And then from there, I started pulling the data for citywide, and we saw a significant increase. And then when we had our barcode deployed, we look at hotspots. So it's the old saying in criminology of cops on dots. I think the NYPD coined that term, but we use it all the time at VPD, is if I don't have a dot, I can't put a cop on it. So we looked at all the data, and that is kind of how we followed our deployment model. We looked at time of day. We looked at day of week. So, in some instances, one of the barcodes, we noticed a spike at the beginning of when a store opens is actually when they would get hit the most by shoplifters. We hit that. Then it changed in the next barcode. It was actually the time between 5 and 7 when it's kind of after work, the shops are busy. That was the time that shoplifters would go in with a list and, take a rack of clothes. So that's the behind the scenes of the numbers is we actually drill down the data so much that we'll look at the offender profile in a fact to know, are they stealing from where they live? Meaning, do they live in downtown Vancouver? And if so, and then what shops are they hitting? Do they not live? Do they have vehicles associated to them?
How do they get there?
Do they use a taxi?
How do they get
there?
Yeah. The conversation is like, it's like that movie Moneyball. You're the analyst in that movie Moneyball.
Yes.
Everybody ordinarily looks at it this way. We're going to look at it with all this incredible
we're going to look
data.
at it with all the other layers that get you to that point.
Question for you. Let me put your criminology hat on and ask, what is it that is fueling the crime in general? And Craig mentioned a couple of things. Crimes of opportunity. Is it a social justice? Is it a criminal justice system that needs better funding so that the courts can work faster, so less people are out on bail? Is it drug abuse? You and I both know, we all know there's many reasons why people get into this career or line of work or theft. But can you put your finger on a couple of them? Because later I'm going to ask you, if I gave you a magic criminal justice wand, what would you do first? But from your perspective, people, I don't think people grow up and tell their friends in kindergarten they're going to grow up to be an organized crime thief. Maybe some do.
No.
But what is it that in society or the overall system is kind of pushing people in this direction? Lack of opportunity, lack of hope, lack of mental illness? When you think of it, maybe all of the above. But what do you think?
I think, in my opinion, Michael, and this is just my opinion on years of looking at different cases and different offenders, I think it's a very multifaceted, layered item we need to look at. It's not one thing. I do think the criminal justice system needs a little bit of a revamp. And I think anybody who has touched the criminal justice system in any form or capacity, offenders even, will comment and say, yeah, there needs to be a little bit of an overhaul on how our system works. I think our social services is lacking. I know specifically in Vancouver, that was one of the issues that I felt so passionate about in the last few years, looking at how these individuals are actually being victimized themselves, because most of the individuals we're dealing with, when they're repeat offenders, specifically to Barcode or Retail Crime Project, they have no fixed address. And that's part of the behind the scenes data that I was looking at is, what's their offender profile we're looking at? Well, part of it is a lot of them have substance abuse addictions, trauma that they've endured, lack of support services. There's this.
They've somehow fallen through
Vancouver.
Fallen through a net somewhere, somehow.
As you said, nobody. I say this to my own child in a way that a 5-year-old can understand. Everybody is somebody's kid. So it's not, as you said, they don't wake up in kindergarten and say, I'm going to be an offender, I'm going to be a criminal. No, it's something that happened. But unfortunately, right now, as it stands, and I say nationally, not just a Vancouver specific issue, we don't have the proper services to assist. And until there's proper wraparound services and actual acknowledgement of what we're dealing with, and it's not just a criminal justice issue, it's not just a police issue, it's not just a frontline issue, this problem is just going to keep repeating itself. This goes back into the repeat offender issue. We have repeat offenders that we arrested in one barcode phase over 6 or 7 times. Just in so we've had 6 barcodes so far, but just in one barcode, we arrested the same individual 6 or 7 times. And they would even, by the 3rd arrest, would shake their head and say, you got me. Well, there's a story behind that offender. They had a drug debt. They had to pay that drug debt. Well, who's telling them to steal these items? They weren't stealing for themselves. And I think that's the other takeaway of the retail crime, how it's evolved, is what Craig touched on, is we're no longer seeing someone steal a sandwich. We're seeing someone go in, stealing a rack of $800 parkas out of a store and have to pay off a debt that they've endured.
I hear that. I talked to police, and I was in New York last week and wound up speaking to a police officer, and we were talking about that same thing. And for them, it becomes human smuggling, right? These people have to pay off debts to people who got them in the country. I don't think our country has the same issue. We have very different borders and different issues, but boy, it's complicated, right? So
it is very complicated. And it is, a lot of it is, we have to look at that sometimes these people owe something to someone and they're doing this. It's not just that they even have set up shop and reselling it for themselves. We have the issue in our downtown east side, which is a huge, people are well aware in our justice system in Vancouver what we're dealing with there. A lot of those individuals have addiction issues, but a lot of those individuals have trauma that they've endured. They're not they haven't been provided the right services, and they've kind of started a market down there. So that's all part of the cycle that we're part of. I don't think that I would love to say, we just need more cops. That's not the answer. Or, we need to be harder on crime. Yeah, we may need that. That's not an argument that I'm not supporting. But there's also other layers that we need to address before we come after just the one topic.
Yeah. And I think it's important to also add that when we do Project Barcode or things like that, we're not targeting the person who's stealing to survive, like stealing the sandwich. To be honest, in the last Barcode, we did get someone who was stealing a sandwich. They'd just been, I think, released from hospital. They had no money. They had no food, and they stole a sandwich. we're not going to arrest them. To be honest, and I like to always give these stories, the sergeant went and bought the sandwich for them.
Yeah.
Right? Our goal is for Barcode in these is to target the violent chronic offenders who are terrorizing the staff, who are bringing the violence into these retail stores. We're not going after that one person who's just like, I'm starving, I need something to eat, and I've stolen a chocolate bar.
Crime of I describe it as a crime of desperation or versus impulse or opportunity.
Yeah, we've actually seen more of a decrease in those type of incidents because that's not really being reported because even retailers are understanding that. It's the other facet that we're looking at and has increased over the last 2-3 years.
Okay, magic wand time. I'm going to ask this of both of you. I'm going to give you a magic wand, and you can touch it on one or two things, but not everything. If you had a magic wand to try to make a real dent in this, not that you haven't with this project, but kind of what would you do in the criminal justice system? And Arezo, I'll ask you to start, and then Craig, I'm going to see if you agree or you got another magic wand destination.
I have a few ideas if I had a magic wand. One would be I would definitely put more resources for our criminal justice system. I would say more accountability to our courts as well. I think that's something that needs to be looked at further. Not so much the frontline, Crown or defense. I'm talking about the justice system, the case precedents, that level. I do think there needs to be more frontline officers. I'm not going to deny that. And that's not because I'm saying we need to be, uniform heavy. I'm saying that because there's a lot of agencies now, police agencies, that are realizing they need more community officers. That's what I mean by frontline, is we need more boots on the ground. The old school policing, which was you knew the neighborhood cop, he was walking around, he would go and grab a coffee from the local corner store. We need more of that. But unfortunately, a lot of our major cities are understaffed and we don't have that. And what we're seeing in Vancouver is our members are just have enough time in the 12 hours to respond to the calls that are waiting on the board.
If I said you can either have a helicopter or more people on the street, which one would you take?
I'd say more people on the street. I think anybody who is in operations for sure would say more people on the street. Yeah.
Craig, what do you think? Would you, if I offered you a helicopter or more resources on the team, or maybe something else, maybe bigger jails so that less people be on bail and we could get them through faster? Is that a solution? I mean, we know the Americans have an interesting system, a privatized system that actually encourages people to go back, I think, sometimes, because it's better than the life they're leading. But what would you do with your magic wand?
Yeah, no, I think more, if we're a helicopter or more people, I would always ask for more people. I mean, perfect example is when we brought it back to business liaison, the position, the amount of connections we were able to make with businesses and find out what's going on and actually come up with strategies to work to solve some of these challenges, together, instead of, the business just saying, this is a problem, fix it. Now we're working together. So more people connecting with businesses, with the communities is always helpful. Would I like to see, addiction be dealt with? Yes. I think every police officer would like to see more supports for addiction.
Upstream solutions. Yeah, upstream
solutions. And I think in the big scheme of things, especially for retail crime, it's, one of the inspectors says it's kind of like a stool where you have three legs, right? We need the businesses, we need the police, and we need the courts and government. And everyone needs to work equally together to keep it up. So I think doing those types of things would be the best. That would be my magic one, getting everyone together, working together, helping the people out on the street. That's why we all join the police, is to help people. So more of that.
Well, you're doing an amazing job. It's a fantastic initiative. Craig, what's next for Project Barcode? I think you go in waves or phases. Can you share a bit of what's next and then how to get in touch with you if retailers or someone else has any questions?
Yeah, I think we're going to continue to evolve Project Barcode. How that looks, depends on what we're seeing on the streets and in terms of the intel, what the analysts are giving us. I think organized retail crime is going to have to be one of our, major push with Barcode, trying to get the fences, our anti-fencing unit engaged even more so we can address kind of the root cause of it. and continue to work with businesses, continue to work, develop those relationships with them. There's technology as well. We really want to see more reporting from the stores. So how, as a police agency, we can do that, or messaging with the stores on how to, report. We brought out online reporting, which is a great tool for, statistical purposes. If the store wants to report and not have police attend, but they want to say, hey, yeah, we had someone come in, we don't have no video, but we had some theft of a product, that, report online. So that way we know everything that's going on. So evolving that with Project Barcode, so we're getting the better picture. So then that way we can, when we put our people out on the street, they're more effective. We're allocating our resources to be the most effective in dealing with this challenge.
Yeah, very smart. And if people want to get a hold of either of you, they go through Vancouver Police Department, they can reach you both? Yeah?
Yeah, they can. Yeah, any retailers, they can. I think you have my email. They can get through there. We actually have a new business liaison, Constable Jade Spencer Tam. She's going to be taking over the business liaison role. I'll still be kind of overlooking Barcode.
Oh, I think I met her right at that stand-up
you met
table.
Jade. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So,
and she came off the street,
Jade's
right? She was an officer on the street,
yes.
right? Right.
Yeah, she's come right out of patrol, so she is starting up. So it would be good if people want to connect with her. I think the big thing is, one of the messages I keep finding is people say they don't want to bug us. Oh, we didn't want to report it because, you guys are busy. But this is our job, So if they're having challenges, get in touch with us. Get in touch with Jade. It's, or neighborhood policing officers. There's many different community officers out there that people can connect with. Because the more we know, it's like that old, thing on the TV. The more we know, the more you know, right? The more we know, the better we can serve the public and come up with these strategies like Barcode. That's how it started.
Fantastic.
By just dialogue.
Yeah. Well, this is fantastic, and I guess highlights. It was a good decision for me to kind of ask you to be both on the show, because it's been a great interview, and I think a lot of people will walk away a lot smarter about what's happening. And listen, congratulations to you both on your wins and successes, and helping our retailers and defending the community and doing all that great stuff. And I thank you for joining me on the Voice of Retail podcast. Great discussion.
Thank you so much,
Michael. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.